Hi there, you're watching News9. This is the weekly brief, and even though I'm sitting close to the camera, I'm feeling a little dwarfed today, sitting with the two doyens that I have with me. I've got Karki, editor of News9, and R. Sridharan, editor, International TV9 Network. And let's dive in straight into what happened in the newsroom this week. Well, gentlemen, we don't sit on the same floor, but I think a sort of flavor which was there across all floors, across all offices, across anybody who watches news this week was what happened in Nepal. One would be tempted to say that what we saw as visuals coming from Nepal is unprecedented, but it isn't. We've seen a repeat of Bangladesh. We've seen a repeat of Sri Lanka. We've seen a repeat of Kenya. We've seen a repeat of South Korea. And what happened in Nepal wasn't exactly new, but the scale at which it flared up seemed like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? And guess what? It ended towards the end of the week with Sushila Karki taking over as the interim prime minister. In your mind, Rakesh, let me start by asking you, what really went down? Was it just a social media ban? Or is there a lot more to the Nepal story than 26 apps being banned?
Hi, Kartik. I mean, it's a very sad and tragic story, and it has a reflection not just in the neighborhood, but all across the world. I think there is growing restlessness among the youth, and they become the manifest of the larger challenges that the society at large is facing. That's corruption, inequity, indiscipline, capitalism, the ugly face of it, not the social face of it. All that put together, brought Nepal to its knees, as we can see.
Yeah.
What has happened, Nepal also has a history of extremely, brutal past. If we remember, the entire monarchy, one particular family was wiped out in internal feud. So somehow that day also I was equally shocked as I'm shocked today. I am not able to fathom this as a pure play, student movement. There is a context which may be subtle, which may be latent, but it's being fueled, also to some extent funded by larger international groups who want the neighborhood to be an extremely volatile situation.
Right. Of course. I mean, without credible evidence, I think it won't be prudent to name what these external elements are. But proximity of Nepal with China is something that a lot of people would have a problem with, given the strategic location of Nepal. So, Shri, if Nepal could burn, what is stopping other countries in our neighborhood to also succumb to such issues now?
So before I come to that, Kartik, I want to dwell a little bit upon the point that you made about how, while what we're looking at, what happened in Nepal is scary. I mean, the extent of violence and the arson and everything that went on was really unprecedented. But if you look at the nature of revolutions that have happened historically, going all the way back to, let's say, the French Revolution of 1789, or to, let's say, the Chinese Revolution or the Russian Revolution, or more recently, the Arab Spring, they have all begun from very small incidents. For example, the Arab Spring began in Tunisia with one street vendor, self-immolating because he was being harassed by police. And then, he said, I have no way of making a living in this country. So that became the spark. But what is important to understand, as Rakesh also pointed out, is that behind every such incident, there is years of accumulated anger, resentment, suppression of people, disenchanted people. It accumulates over a period of time, and all you need is a small tinder keg, something to set it off.
That's right.
And that's exactly what happened in Nepal. And it's also happened in Sri Lanka, it's happened in Bangladesh. So this is not totally unprecedented in that sense. Now, how does it matter to India that China's or Nepal is was on the boil? It's uncertain. We have Bangladesh, which again is an issue for us, social unrest. It's going to the harder line of Islam in some sense. It was a very moderate culture to begin with. I think the significance is the fact that Nepal is wedged between India and China.
Correct.
Right? So although it's a tiny country, Rakesh also mentioned the troubled history it has had since its formation, about almost 300 years ago, or maybe less, 250 years ago, 275 years ago. It has not had a stable governance. I think Rakesh 15 or 14 prime ministers in 15 years in Nepal.
And that too with the syndrome, I'm using Ram in a generic sense, Aya Ram, Gaya Ram. There's a certain set of individuals who keep coming, aligning together, are forced one day. So that is the tragedy of Nepal from the political balance perspective.
But Nepal also, over the last at least 15 years or so, that we have seen this multiple changes of governments, we haven't really been able to ascribe a particular line of thought for the citizens of Nepal. At one point, it was anti-monarchy. It became pro-Hindu. I think 2021, 2022, it became pro-monarchy again. What do people of Nepal really want right now? I understand they don't want nepotism. They don't want crony capitalism stroke coney communism, if one could call it that, if there's a term like that. But what do people of Nepal really want today from their government? Because at the end of the day, youth across the world, no matter which country they are in, want the same things. They want
Absolutely.
jobs. They want a
Absolutely.
better quality of life. They want more money flowing into their households. They want a better standard of living. But Nepal has been unable to provide that to its
True.
people. So government changing, new governments coming, is something really going to ever change?
That's what I said. The individuals haven't changed. The irony of Nepal is that those set of 5-6 people, and that too from influential families, continue to rule. The color of the alignment changes.
Right.
That's where the level of frustration also grows. And in terms of the ideological swing where Nepal is today, it is absolutely confused, whether it's pro-Hindu, and the Indian influence in the last 10 years has been on the wane.
That's right.
Chinese influence, that means the communist influence has been on the rise. It's perplexing, that the current regime was getting closer to the Chinese establishment. There have been so many frequent visits, far larger than there have been to India.
Sure.
And in fact, for the first time, the traditional mode of the Prime Minister or the new leader coming first to India and then to China was
Right.
reversed this time.
Right.
So
Right.
in that sense, I think the youth represent the larger restlessness, I repeat that. And the youth, that cohort, it's a very large cohort all over the world. It's not just a cohort as big in India.
Right.
And that is bound by a common aspiration. They
Right.
want growth. Because of the digital arena, they're now exposed. That's the difference that has happened in the last 10 years. They're exposed to the larger reality of the world at large in terms of, what the youth are doing there. And I
Right.
think for Nepal, India's growth is also a bit of an irony because they feel that we are so close, we look alike, we speak Hindi, we worship the same temples, yet we are so far away from the growth that India has achieved.
You're right.
But it's a fascinating question you really asked, Karthik. And let's look at it from the perspective of two largest, economies in the world: US,
US and China. Right.
Bill Clinton, many years ago when he ran the election, said it's the economy stupid. So even if you're the wealthiest country in the world, if you cannot give, jobs, if you can't ensure wealth of your citizens, there is going to be unrest.
Right.
Now let's come to China. What has China done very well, despite not giving its citizens the kind of freedom that you get in, let's say, a US or even
Sure.
India?
Yeah.
They've ensured prosperity of their
right.
citizens.
That's
Everyone
right.
has a full meal, everyone has employment, and everyone knows that I have a fairly secure future, at least until recently. So what Nepal has not been able to do is exactly that. It's a very tiny economy. It's 2/3 of its GDP comes from agriculture. 25% comes from agriculture, but 2/3 of the people depend on agriculture for employment.
Sure.
The largest industry is tourism, and the money that Nepalis who are outside of Nepal who send to the
Remitting
economy.
back to,
So there is
their
nothing that's
families.
really happened in Nepal. Industry just 5% of the GDP. So there is absolutely nothing for people
So
to look
I
forward
want-
to.
And,
I want
and
to
to
just
pick up
understand
from the
geoeconomically.
Indian political economy, Nepal is one little country which doesn't. I mean, India also has a stiff challenge of jobs, but the social guarantee in terms of the free meal for 80 crore people and a lot of other schemes where there's a lot of competitive federalism happening between states.
Yeah, there's no government balance
ensures
sheet.
that
Yeah.
it ensures that at least there is a basic taken care of.
Right. So I think one could also potentially argue that
Nepal,
India
I
is
was trying to
a
say, is
capitalist
going
country.
through an
India is not a
identity
socialist
crisis.
country, and
That's right.
hence taxpayers' money being used to offset the meals for those who we as a country are unable to provide employment for is also debatable. But perhaps we leave that for another weekly
No,
brief, perhaps.
it
But
brings about a certain sense of comfort also.
sure, but I mean, there are pros and cons for communism because the example that you made of China, I think that is true for pretty much any country which has operated as a communist country, as a socialist
With
country.
limited freedom to its people.
With limited freedom to its people. So whether you want democracy, whether you want voting rights, you want to choose the government who comes and sits in the seat of power, or whether you are happy just following a very regimented lifestyle and being taken care of, I think there are pros and cons for both. But the point I really want to drive home and want to arrive at, honestly, is geoeconomically, no matter who sparks the unrest and for what end, towards what end, can Nepal today live without China?
No, both India. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's. I think there's an exaggeration in terms of the perception that the entire economy is dependent on China. politically, the alignment has happened towards China.
All right,
But,
let me
you know,
rephrase it.
yeah.
Let me rephrase it.
No, but on that point, I'll tell you that there is a difference between the political establishment of Nepal and the common man of Nepal. Because if you look
And
at
the
it, one of
economic
the reasons why people saw this ban on social media, 26 social media apps were banned, but they exempted TikTok. That was
Because-
seen by the Aam Aadmi in Nepal as an alignment that the government is making openly with China. And that did not go down well with the students.
But to be fair to the government of Nepal, the ex-government of Nepal, and God knows where Mr. Oli is right now, but to owe it to the ex-government in Nepal, TikTok was the only social media app which was registered in Nepal, and all the other American apps from your Metas, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp to YouTube, which is run by Alphabet, and many other apps that got banned,
But that's
were
also
not
actually
registered in
just a
Nepal.
but that's
technicality.
actually-
I think
no,
that's
not
a
a technicality. It's a governance
That
deficit.
was the only requirement.
It's a governance, it's
The
a
only
policy
requirement
vacuum.
that the government of Nepal
So
had
did you give
was
the other apps
register.
time to register? Did you tell them
As
you have
much-
to register?
as much time as was
So
given
did you
to
tell
have
them
TikTok.
No.
10 days, 15 days register, otherwise you're going to ban you?
7 days was
You
the
didn't,
time.
right?
7 days was the time given. TikTok registered, the others did not. Now, did TikTok register proactively? Did ByteDance register proactively or not? We don't know. But the fact is that none of the other apps complied with a simple demand from the government. India got that compliance from
That's right.
US-based.
No,
apps.
India is
right.
not Nepal.
No, the whole
I
fact.
know.
What
What
I'm
I'm
trying to
saying-
point out, even in the peacefulest of the time in Nepal, there was a policy vacuum. There is a governance deficit.
Sure.
No,
I
it's,
just
it's
want
a
to arrive-
dysfunctional government. The
That's
series
right.
of dysfunctional governments.
Right, which we've seen across Sri Lanka as well, for example, right? Which we've seen the protests in South Korea against the Yoon Suk Yeol government as well. Kenya, right? They've been unable to pass the budget. They've been unable to, and again, the issues of nepotism continue to exist. And I think what I want to leave this conversation with, and if we can arrive at an answer, is that minus external influence. I'll rephrase the question I asked. Minus external influence, whether it is Nepal, whether it is part dependence on India, or folks from Nepal going abroad, seeking employment abroad, remitting money back home. Internally, is Nepal on the verge of taking off as an economy? Can it take off as an economy that it is able to provide for its people?
It's these
I don't
And
know.
will government changes institutionalize
It's
that?
a hard road ahead for
economy
Nepal.
is a function of the political framework. Whichever the country is, whichever the canvas is. The political framework has to establish itself as a robust player.
Absolutely.
To
That's
my
the starting
mind,
point
That's the
for-
starting point.
Yes.
And to my mind, I would imagine a military.
Did we
rule-
take that assumption even for Bangladesh when Bangladesh was flaring up, and look what happened after the regime change?
No,
but
I mean,
Bangladesh had built a very successful export industry.
And
That's
yet
right.
we saw protests, and yet we saw unhappiness, and yet we saw nepotism, and we saw unequal distribution of wealth.
But relatively compared to Nepal, Bangladesh was still well off.
But
you
China
know,
had its Tiananmen Square,
Absolutely.
despite the
I mean,
economy growing at
yeah.
10%.
So I would imagine it needs stability in political governance to be able to drive some economic
I think that
stability.
is the first prerequisite for Nepal to have a stable government which can start putting in place the building blocks that you need for a strong economy to be created, for people to get jobs, for industry to be created.
Right.
As long as that doesn't happen, this unrest is going to happen.
Where is the money to build those stable structures going to come from?
Good question.
No, good. That's right. I think
Will it be China? Will it be India? I don't know how much India is going to.
No, it has
because
sustained its investments.
diplomatically, yes. Economically, I think there is enough data to suggest that it is China which is supporting
Obviously,
whatever
China-
But we
Nepal wants to do
but we
internally.
also saw what
China's-
India's blockade did to Nepalese economy.
That's right,
It
yes.
brought them
so,
to the knees.
To conclude, I would say India must stay invested whatever China does, irrespective of what China does. Of course, we don't have the same economic muscle that China has. So, China uses debt as a leverage to colonize.
Checkbook diplomacy, as they
No,
call
not
it,
diplomacy.
yeah.
I'm colonization. I mean, it's the worst
It's
shape of
a
diplomacy.
more, I think,
yeah,
a modest term.
So in that sense, I would imagine that India should stay invested, and I would, stick my neck out and seek stability in Nepal through a military regime for some time.
Oh, military regime stability
Because this
coming
set of
through military
individuals-
regime at a time when the Chief Justice, a former Chief Justice, has actually taken oath as the interim Prime
I
Minister.
know, but that's interim.
Interim, yeah, of course, that is the operative word,
Before
yeah.
you wrap up, very quickly, historically also, Rakesh, it's an important point he's made because social revolutions have succeeded when the military institution of those countries
In the
supported
interim.
it.
In the interim.
So I think it's an important point.
They can't stay there forever.
Military
but
needs
they
to be
need
on
stabilize
board.
Things.
Yeah.
Because all the names. Look at the discussion that they had with the military, the Gen Z guys. There are 6 names. One name they might have agreed today. Tomorrow is another day.
Right, of course. Well, we will see what tomorrow brings for the people of Nepal. But of course, that is a story that we will continue to track very closely here on News9.